Masechet Nazir Daf Lamed Aleph, and today we begin the fifth perek. The topic of the fifth perek is doing something in error. With the first Mishnah is going to be about consecrating an animal or some item you consecrate and make holy, but it's based on some error, as we'll see different examples. Is that considered a proper consecration or not? On the one hand, if my intention was an error, you could say it shouldn't be. But we're going to see, because of a comparison to timurah, that something can become holy even if it was an error. All right, that's the first Mishnah. The next Mishnayot in the Perek are going to be about a Nazir becoming a Nazir based on an error, some kind of condition that I did it on condition, even though the condition didn't get fulfilled. Does a person become a Nazir or not? All right, so that's why it's here, but we're already going to see those Mishnayot quoted in the discussion today. So we begin. Bet Shammai omrim hekdesh ta'ut hekdesh, ubet Hillel omrim en hekdesh. A fundamental machloket. Bet Shammai said, even though it's based on an error, the consecration is valid, and that animal or item will have to go to the Bet HaMikdash. And Bet Hillel says, no, we go by a person's intention, and the person, it was based on an error. He didn't intend this item to be consecrated, so it's not consecrated. Let's see a couple of examples. Kesad. Amar shor shachor sheyasemi beti rishon harehu hekdesh v'yasa lavan. Bet Shammai omrim hekdesh u'bet Hillel omrim eno hekdesh. Person says, the first black bull that comes out of my house will be hekdesh. And then turns out a white one comes out. So Bet Shammai says it is hekdesh. The simple reading of the Mishnah is that the white one is hekdesh. So the thing is, even though he said black bull, he also said that comes out first. So we assume that what he means is, whatever will come out of my house first, that will be hekdesh. Like Yiftach does, he thinks that animal is going to come out first. His daughter comes out first, right? It's an error, but nevertheless, even though he had in mind something else would come out first, whatever comes out first is a hekdesh. And the same thing would be here. He assumed a black one would come out first. Maybe that's what usually happens, but it turns out a white one did. So even though he made an error in his assumption, nevertheless, since he said which comes out first, so anything that comes out first, that will be hekdesh. So this is, it contains an error, that nevertheless it's hekdesh. And Bet Hillel says, no, it's not hekdesh. The person said, the black bull that comes out first, assuming if it's a black bull that comes out first, then it's hekdesh. If a white bull comes out first, then that's nothing as hekdesh. Not the white one that comes out. And according to Bet Hillel, not a black one that comes out either later, because it wasn't first. All right, that's the simple reading. What we're going to see in the Gemara is two different interpretations of Bet Shammai to lessen this idea. We're going to ask a question about Bet Shammai, which is, he didn't mean to make this a hekdesh, right? A person can make a condition only if this, and that, then it's hekdesh, otherwise not. So why should it be hekdesh if he only wanted it to be a black one that comes out first? All right, we're going to see two different explanations of Bet Shammai. Now, a second example. Dinar zahav she'ale biyadi rishon harehu hekdesh v'ala shel kesef. Bet Shammai omrim hekdesh, Bet Hillel omrim eno hekdesh. A person reaches into a purse and he says, the golden dinar that comes out first in my hand, I want that to be hekdesh. And then he takes out a coin, and turns out it was a silver coin. So Bet Shammai said, oh, that's hekdesh anyway, because he said the first one, he thought that a gold one would come out first, but he was mistaken in that. Even though it was an error, nevertheless, the rest of his statement, which comes out first, that's what he said. And therefore, whatever comes out first, even if it's not the same as what he thought would come out first, it is that silver one is hekdesh. And Bet Hillel says, no, none of them are hekdesh, nothing is hekdesh, because he was saying, only if it's a silver one, only if it's a golden one that comes out first, then it will be. But this is an error that came out, so it's not hekdesh. Chavit shel yain shetale biyadi rishona harehi hekdesh v'alta shel shemen. Person has a whole bunch of barrels. From the outside of the barrel, you can't tell what's inside. And so he says, the first barrel that I will take into my hand of wine, that will be hekdesh. And so he goes and takes a barrel, opens it up, and turns out, oh, it's oil. So the Gemara is going to discuss whether oil or wine are more expensive. Generally, we can assume oil is more expensive. Bet Shammai omrim hekdesh, Bet Hillel omrim eno hekdesh. So again, here Bet Shammai says we focus on the fact that he said the first one that comes to my hand, and even though he was in error about what its content was, nevertheless it is hekdesh. And Bet Hillel says no, it's not hekdesh. He only said if it's wine, but it turns out it was oil, so he didn't mean to make the oil hekdesh, and so it's not hekdesh. Okay, good. So those are three examples, and now let's analyze the reasoning behind each of the houses. Bet Shammai omrim hekdesh. Mai tamar de Bet Shammai. Te'alfinan techilat hekdesh misof hekdesh. Ma temora afilu betaut af hekdesh afilu betaut. So what's the reason for Bet Shammai? Right, after all, it would seem that anything you do in an error should not be valid. You know, if you go through, if I buy something from you, thinking that it's something else, right? And I bought it in error, so then I can go back and say, no, this was the wrong item that you gave me, right? And so the sale is void, right? So if it's something that's an error, then it shouldn't be valid to begin with. So why does Bet Shammai say that an error in consecration works? Well, he learns the beginning of making something consecrated from the end. By end, he means a timura. That means something that is already consecrated. I had animal A, and I said, this is going to be consecrated for a korban. So that's what it means end, because it's already at the end stage. It's already consecrated. And then I say, you know what? I changed my mind. I don't want A. I want animal B to be consecrated instead. And I try to switch it from A to B. As we know, that's prohibited, and if a person does do that, then A and B both get consecrated. Even if it's an error, a person thought he can change it out, or he thought some detail about one or the other that turned out not to be true, doesn't matter. Timura works that way, that A and B become timura, even if he thought that A wouldn't be, or even if he said something about the second one that's going to be black, but he meant white, doesn't matter. Regarding timura, we see in timura that an error is even if it's an error, it becomes consecrated. And so therefore Bet Shammai says, I'm going to make a simple analogy. Just like that's true at the end process of timura, so too, making something hekdesh to begin with, even though it was an error, and he said something that ended up not being true. He thought it was going to be white. He thought it was going to be black. He said black, ended up being white. Nevertheless, like timura, it is consecrated. So that's Bet Shammai's reasoning. That makes sense. Bet Hillel says, no, I don't have to compare these two things. Only regarding timura, then I agree. Yes, a substitution done in error, nevertheless, is consecrated. But that, in that case, there is already something consecrated, and now it's going to apply it to something else as well. There's more reason to say that an error with something already consecrated will continue, and the substitute will also be consecrated. Whereas here, right now, there's nothing consecrated, right? All the animals in the barn are cholin, and now I want to make something go from zero and from cholin and make it consecrated. There, no, I don't agree. An error in that case does not work and is not consecrated, right? So it's less of a reason to say that an initial hekdesh should be as stringent as something that already is hekdesh that I'm substituting. So that's why Bet Hillel says an error in consecration is not an error. All right, good. Now that we understand the reasoning, here's a challenge to Bet Shammai. ולבית שמאי, מה אילו אמר הרי זה תחת זה לחסי היום? מי הביאה תמורה מהי שעתה? אלא עד דמצ'ה חסי היום, הוא דהביאה תמורה. הכי נמה, לכי מגליה מליטה. בית שמאי, you're comparing the initial hekdesh to timura. I have a question about a timura case. If a person in the morning, let's say at 8 in the morning, said, I want animal B to be instead of animal A for half of the day, meaning from noon and on. Okay, if he says that, Now, of course, the substitute doesn't take off the Kiddusha of A. That's the way it works. It applies to A and also to B. But the question is, when does B become consecrated? Right? Would B become consecrated from that time that he said that, from 8 o'clock in the morning? Says no, it would only be from noon. That's when his statement would take effect, because he said, I want B to be a substitute for A for half the day, assuming starting at noon. So nothing happens until noon. At noon, his words take effect, and his words take effect even if it's an error, because he thought A will be chulin and transferred to B. Nevertheless, A and B are become consecrated, but B doesn't happen till noon, right? And that's regarding Timurah. What we see is that even in Timurah, a person's words have meaning, and if a person gives a condition and says, I only want the timurah, the substitution, to happen at a certain time or in a certain way, so he can make such a condition. All right, it's different from error. All right, error. I thought something different. And I meant white. I said black. But here he makes a condition, and the condition does limit the consecration. So So here also, when a person says, the first animal that comes out of my house, that is black. That's what he said. So we should say that we should say here also that when the situation is revealed to be according to his words, in other words, if a black one comes first, then it should be consecrated, and if not, it should not be consecrated. It's like he's making a condition, and therefore, if he says the black one that comes out first from my house should be consecrated, and then the white one, so then nothing should be consecrated. It's not really an error, it's a conditional statement. That's the challenge to Bet Shammai, right? We know Bet Shammai. We understand you're comparing it to Timurah, but Timurah you can make a condition, so here also make a condition. Amar Rav Papa, lekach ne'emar rishon l'chsheyaseh rishon. Rav Papa says, I'm going to re-explain Bet Shammai a little bit differently. You see, he said the first one. So what he means is the black bull, that will emerge first. And therefore, you're right. If a white one comes out first, the white one will not be consecrated. But later on, eventually a black one's going to come out. So the first black one to come out, that will be consecrated. So I agree with you, right? We do treat it kind of like an if statement. And he said, right, whatever, a conditional statement. And he said, the black one that comes out of my house first, right, that will be consecrated. So, okay, a white one comes out, another white one, a black one comes out, the black one will be consecrated. Okay, so it's perfectly fine. Now, a question, can we really explain it that way? The guy said, when a black bull, sounds like there's only one black bull. Aren't we talking about a case where there's only one black bull altogether? And so it wouldn't make sense to say the first a black bull if there's only one, right? She should have just said, when the black bull comes out, then it'll be consecrated. If he's saying first, that implies that he's saying whatever is first. And so the conditional statement doesn't really make sense. So this is Rapapa. It's hard to explain this Mishnah if there's only one black bull. And so we answer, okay, fine. La sericha diit le teren telata. Rapapa's statement only works assuming that there are 2 or 3 black bulls. If there was only one black bull, then you're right. The statement would be problematic. But let's assume that there are 2 and 3, right? Which is usually people have more than one animal, and there are many animals. So now we have our reinterpretation of Bet Shammai that solves the problem. The person has many bulls, many black ones, and he says the first black bull that should emerge from the house will be consecrated. If a white one comes out, not consecrated. He made a condition, right? So this is not an error. It's a condition. So the white one is free to go. And then another white one. Then a black one comes out. One of the black ones comes out first. that one is consecrated. Oh, good. So everybody's happy. Now, Bet Hillel omrim, im ken sheyeseh barishon miba'eleh. Bet Hillel says, I don't agree with that interpretation. If he meant the black bull that will emerge, he should have said the black bull sheyeseh barishon, that will emerge. But instead, he didn't say sheyeseh barishon. Right? Remember the exact language. He said shor shachor sheyeseh mi beti rishon. That comes out of my house first. By adding those words, that comes out of my house first, that implies whatever comes out of my house first, right? That's the simple meaning of his words, that he assumed it will be a black bull. But really, he was thinking that which comes out of my house first, whatever animal comes out first. So if it's a black one that comes out first, then he was correct. If it's a white one, then he made a mistake. And according to Bet Hillel, if a white one comes out first and then a black one comes later, then nothing is consecrated, because we assume he meant the black one that comes, the black one, and that's the one that will come out first of all the animals. If he meant to say a black one that comes out first, even if a white one comes before, then he should not have said sheyeseh mi beti rishon. Okay, so that's why Bet Hillel does not agree with that interpretation. Yeah, im ken sheyeseh barishon mi ba'eleh. Should just said simply sheyeseh barishon mi ba'eleh. All right, now amar le Rava mi barnish le Ravashe. Hai hekdesh betautu, hekdesh bechavanahu. Now we have a challenge to Rav Papa's interpretation, which is that this would not be an erroneous consecration. It's actually a consecration with intention. Why are you calling this hekdesh ta'ut? Right, the beginning of the Mishnah says that they disagree regarding hekdesh hekdesh ta'ut hekdesh. Now this is not hekdesh ta'ut. This is just a condition that the guy said. The black bull that will come out first, that one will be consecrated. Turns out a white one came out first. He didn't have in mind that, he didn't know which one's going to come out first, and so he was totally fine. He knew that maybe a white one will come out first, not that one. Next one is a white one, not that one. Black one, yeah, that's the one I meant. So there's not actually a hekdesh ta'ut here. And so Rav Papa, you re-explained Bet Shammai so smoothly, right, in order to answer the question, but in a way too smoothly, because now it's not even an error anymore. It's just simply a condition. So we answered, for Rav Papa, mishum de'at ayeh ledibure kama. The reason why we call it hekdesh ta'ut, even though you're right, it's not technically an error, because we have to diverge from the simple meaning of his statement. We have to reinterpret it. And it sounds like it was a mistaken language. No, he meant to say this. In other words, we're admitting that when a person says the first animal, the black bull that comes out first from my house, the simple syntax, the straightforward syntax of that statement means the first animal that comes out, right? And he's assuming that it'll be black. So if he said that would be consecrated, that would be truly a consecration in error. But we rejected that already, because if it's totally an error, then it shouldn't be consecrated, because he didn't want it to be consecrated. It's like a condition. And therefore, we say, listen, he didn't mean that, because we can divert the words to a different meaning, to say that what he meant is the first black one that will come out. So it's still called hekdesh ta'ut, even though technically it's not an error. It's just that it's based on a reinterpretation. Okay, so Rav Papa is still good. Now we're going to ask about this from this view of Bet Shammai from another source. This is a Mishnah on the other side of this page. Okay, so our Mishnah here said Bet Shammai says hekdesh beta'ut is not hekdesh, even though in the opening of this Mishnah, Bet Shammai says hekdesh ta'ut is hekdesh. Based on Rav Papa's reinterpretation, he said actually this case is not an erroneous case. It's not a case of error. It's a case where he really meant, he used funny words, but he meant that the first animal, bull that's black, will be hekdesh, and so there's no error in his words. So based on this, right, we concluded that Bet Shammai actually would say if it was a real error, it would not be hekdesh. Now, is that true? Look at the next Mishnah. והתנן, מי שנדר מנזיר ונשאל לחכמים והתירו, והייתה לו בהמה מופרשת, תעשה ותראה בעדר. The proof is going to be from the converse, the dialogue between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. So the case is someone who took a vow to be a Nazir. And then he went to the sages and says, I want to annul my vow. And they allowed him to annul the vow. In the meantime, he had already consecrated an animal for his concluding Nazirut. So what do you do with that animal? Because now, he was a Nazir at the time when he consecrated, but now that he annulled it retroactively, he was never a Nazir. So what you can do is you could take that animal and let it go and graze among the flock. In other words, let it join the flock as a regular chulin animal. Right? There's nothing wrong with it. Okay, so that was Bet Shammai said that. Amru Bet Hillel leBet Shammai, I atem modim shekdesh betautu v'teseh v'tir'eh ba'eder. Bet Hillel says to Bet Shammai, wait a second, why should you let it go? Didn't you say, Bet Shammai, didn't you say that a hekdesh betaut, an erroneous consecration, is a consecration, and now you say it should go and go into the field? Doesn't make sense. Now, just based on the response of Bet Hillel to Bet Shammai, we can see Miklad Savre Bet Shammai dekdesh betaut have hekdesh. Right? We can learn from Bet Hillel's response that Bet Hillel interpreted Bet Shammai to mean that Bet Shammai thinks an erroneous hekdesh is hekdesh, and Bet Hillel was there with them. So we can assume, can't we assume that Bet Hillel understood correctly what Bet Shammai thought? So this is the problem. Based on the Papa's interpretation above, Bet Shammai, hekdesh betaut is not hekdesh. But based on what Bet Hillel ascribed to Bet Shammai thinks hekdesh in ta'ut is hekdesh. So we have a problem. So how are we going to answer it? Ela Bet Hillel hu dekata'u. No, in fact, Bet Hillel misinterpreted the opinion of Bet Shammai. Savre ta'amar de Bet Shammai mishum hekdesh beta'ut have hekdesh. V'amri lohon Bet Shammai lav mishum hekdesh beta'ut hu, ela mishum da'at ayeh lidibure chama. Bet Hillel thought that the reasoning of Bet Shammai is because it's hekdesh beta'ut is hekdesh, and that's why that's why they thought when they read the first Mishnah, our Mishnah, and he says a black bull and white one comes out, that it is hekdesh. And they thought if the white one is hekdesh because they read the Mishnah. They didn't have the Mishnah. Obviously, the Mishnah is based on their words, right? But they had the same the case in front of them, and they assumed that when Bet Shammai said that, it was based on ta'ut, hekdesh ta'ut is hekdesh. And then Bet Shammai says, no, it's not. Our reasoning is not because of hekdesh ta'ut, but rather because we reinterpret his first statement. We have to diverge from the plain meaning of his first statement and explain it in a different way, but not as an error, simply as a condition. In other words, the same process that we went through when we read the Peshat of the Mishnah and then the Rav Papa's reinterpretation, that is the very same dialogue that happened between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. Bet Shammai at first said, Hekdesh ta'ut is Hekdesh, and they gave the example of if a person says, a black animal that comes out first from my house, it is Hekdesh. And when Bet Hillel heard that, they assumed he meant the white one that comes out first is Hekdesh, because even though it's an error, it does become consecrated. And so that's why Bet Hillel assumed that Bet Shammai thinks erroneous ones are Hekdesh. And that's why they asked him a question from the second Mishnah. They said, according to you, in the second Mishnah, even though retroactively he was never a Nazir, still, and he made this animal in error, Hekdesh, nevertheless, it should remain Hekdesh, and you can't let it go back into the barn. back to graze in the flock. And so Bet Shammai responded to him and says, no, you misunderstood our statement. We didn't mean that really it's an error. If it was really an error, it would not be Hekdesh. And when we said this, in this case, it's an error, we just mean that you have to diverge from the simple meaning of the syntax and interpret it as saying the first black bull that comes out will be Hekdesh, even if it's not the first animal that comes out and the white one comes first. And so so we actually think that an erroneous Hekdesh is not Hekdesh, and you misinterpreted our words. Okay, so the Papa will have to explain that whole dialogue in the next Mishnah in that way. Okay, v'sabre bet Shammai hekdesh betaut lahave hekdesh. All right, so now the Papa, let's pin you down here. So you think, according to Bet Shammai, an erroneous hekdesh is not valid. Well, what are you going to do with this Mishnah? Another one that's coming up soon. Tashema. Hayu me'alchin baderech ve'echad ba kenegdan. Okay, this is a very, very interesting Mishnah. We're going to get to on the next daf. There were 6 people that were walking on the road, and there was one person that was approaching them, but it was still far away and difficult to identify who that person was. Now, of the 6 people, one of them said, "V'amar echad, hareni Nazir shezeh peloni." Says he's looking from far, and this person A, we'll call him, says, I think that is Reuven, all right, Peloni, whoever it is. And in fact, I'm going to show my commitment to the fact that I'm right by becoming a Nazir, right? I'm making myself a Nazir if that is Reuven, or I'm making myself a Nazir because of the fact that is Reuven. That's how sure I am. All right. Now the next guy, B, takes his bet and says the opposite way. I'll be a Nazir based on the fact that is not Reuven. Now, okay, so now they both based their Nazirut on opposite assumptions. So it would seem that only one of them can possibly be a Nazir, right? Either A or B. Right, but hold on. Hareni Nazir she'achad mikem Nazir. C says, I'll be a Nazir if one of you, A and B, are Nazirim. So it looks like C will for sure be a Navi because either it's Reuven or that guy is not Reuven. So either A is a Nazir or B is a Nazir. So C surely sounds like he will be a Nazir. Now D comes along and he says, She'en echad mehem Nazir. I'll be a Nazir if neither of you, A and B, are Nazirim. Okay, Sheshenechem Nazirim. Now the 5th guy, you see the E says, I'll be a Nazir if both of you, A and B, are Nazirim. So now one of these guys has to be a Nazir, because whatever you think about Nazirut, we're gonna get into this later in the Perek, whether you're a Nazir based on a doubt or an error. But it seems no matter what, A and B, whether both of them, neither of them, one of them are a Nazir. So based on those conditions, C, D, or E will be Nazirim. Now, the last person of the 6, F, Mr. F says, Shekulchem Nazirim. I will be a Nazir if all 5 of you are Nazirim. Now, how could all 5 of them be Nazirim if they're based on different permutations? Well, this is a complicated case, and there are more than one opinion about it, but we're only going to quote Bet Shammai. Bet Shammai Omrim, Kulam Nazirim. Bet Shammai says all of them are Nazirim. Now, why would all of them be Nazirim? If A said, if A said I'm a Nazir, based on the fact that this is Reuven, B said based on not Reuven, should be one or the other. Here's the point. Bet Shammai thinks that Hekdesh b'ta'ut is Hekdesh, and becoming a Nazir b'ta'ut is a Nazir. Even though he said, I'm a Nazir, based on the assumption that is Reuven. Even if he turns out to be wrong, he's still a Nazir, because even though it's an error, an erroneous commitment, is still a commitment, right, when it comes to a vow of Hekdesh or Nazirut. So that is the question. How can you tell me, Rav Papa, that Bet Shammai thinks that Hekdesh b'ta'ut is not Hekdesh, if we see clearly from this Mishnah that a Nazirut, which is also a type of Hekdesh, you're making yourself holy, because of that you're going to make animals holy for concluding your Nazirut, and here, where it's clearly based on an error, no matter what, whether your assumption was true or not, Even if it was an error, you are a Nazir. So, right, so that's the question. As we're going to say, you see, Bet Shammai says, even though it's hekdesh b'ta'ut, becoming a Nazir by erroneously, they are all Nazirim. It is valid. That's the question, and the answer is Amreh. Sabre Bet Shammai hekdesh b'ta'ut heve hekdesh hachalo. No, the Bet Shammai can say that in general, hekdesh b'ta'ut is hekdesh. They do agree with that in other cases, like regarding Nazirim. Yes, that's true for Nazirim. But in this case, in the Mishnah, that's not the reason. The reasoning in this Mishnah for Hekdesh of animals is as Rav Papa explains, right? So don't compare these two cases. The laws of Nazirim is one thing, and we're going to get to that, and we'll analyze why Bet Shammai thinks that a Nazir, even though it's erroneous, is a Nazir. But when it comes to Hekdesh of animals, no, he doesn't think that an erroneous one will be, and that's not the explanation of this Mishnah. Rather, it's the explanation as Rav Papa said, in order to resolve the question that we had to begin with from Timura. All right, all that is Rav Papa's explanation, and we successfully answered all the questions. But then we're going to see a different explanation altogether. Abaye Amar, La kasaka datech dekaim besafra, elacha b'mayaskinan dekaim betihara. We're not talking about a case in this Mishnah of someone that's in the morning saying that so far nothing came out of the barn yet, right? But it's not a case of the morning where nothing came out of the barn, and he's saying whichever animal comes out of the barn, but rather we're talking about where it's in the afternoon, and the animals already came out of the barn, and he's saying something about what happened in the past. The black bull that came out of the house first, that should be hekdesh. Now, I know the Mishnah doesn't say that, and he's going to have to reword the Mishnah because the words of the Mishnah says in the future tense, but Abaye says no, you should interpret it as being in past tense. Now, since it's in past tense, he assumed, he remembered wrongly. He was watching the barn all day, and he remembers that a black bull came out first. And so he's saying that black bull that came out first should be hekdesh. But then people corrected him. No, actually the first one that came out was white. He says, if I knew that the white one came out, I wouldn't have said black, right? I would have said white. In other words, that's what I meant to say. So this answers the question that we had to begin with. The question was regarding a timurah. I can say I want the timurah to happen at noon. I could put a condition in there. And so therefore, if you're going to say it's talking about the morning, and I said the white one that will come out first, well, that's a condition. And if the black one that will come out first, that's a condition. And so if a white one comes out first, no, I never wanted it to be. So in that case, the error should not make it consecrated, right? It doesn't make sense. You should treat it as a condition. Abaye is answering that question by changing the tense and saying it's something that happened already. Since it happened already, it doesn't make sense to say a condition. If it was a black one that came out first, he didn't mean a condition. It's something that he thought is something that actually happened. He just remembered it wrongly. So he thought it was a black one that came out first. So he said that black one that came out first. And then there was a white one. He says, oh, I made a mistake. That's the case we're talking about. And in fact, Bet Shammai says, even though it was an error, we understand what he meant. He meant the first one that came out. And therefore, even though he made a mistake regarding the color, it is still a consecration. And Bet Hillel says, no, it was made an error. It's not a consecration. All right, good. Umi masit amarte ka'em betihara asek. Hold on. Bet Abaye, your logic is good, but how are you going to fit that into the wording of the Mishnah? Can you really say it's talking about the afternoon, looking backwards? The second example was the golden dinar that will come up in my hand. It's talking about that he didn't take one yet. He's going to take one in the future. So he says, Taneh Shala. Okay, you're right. Interpret the Mishnah, or rather reteach it. Taneh, we would say rewrite it, but they're teaching it orally, right? So rememorize it. Teach it as she'ala in the past tense. How about the third case? Chavit shel yain she'ta'aleh. That also it says in the future tense, the barrel of wine that I will take into my hands. So Abaya says, Taneh she'alta. No, teach it as past tense that already came out. All the cases of the Mishnah have to be in past tense, and that is the end of Abaye's response. And so now we have two reinterpretations of the Mishnah in order to answer the question that if it's really just a condition, so a condition should work. And so Rav Papa says, no, it's not a condition. Actually, an erroneous hekdesh would not be hekdesh. So Rav Papa has to reinterpret Bet Shammai's logic to answer the question, whereas Abaye can say the logic is straightforward, but he has to reinterpret it by saying he was talking about something in the past, where that's clearly an error, and it wouldn't be a condition. All right, so those are the two reinterpretations. And now we're going to see a statement of Rav Chisda about which is better, black or white, and black bulls, white bulls, which one is better. In the discussion here, it seems we're going to go back to a simple reading of the Mishnah. So even though we just gave two reinterpretations of Bet Shammai, all right, maybe this part of this sugya might have been independent or earlier than the sugya that we just read. Amar Rav Chisda, ukama bechivara lakya, chivara beukma lakya. Rav Chisda says a paradox. He says black among white is bad, and white among black is bad. Black among white is bad, and white among black is bad. Now, how could that be both ways? He's talking about two different things. When he says black among white is bad, that's talking about a black bull. Compared to white bulls, the black one is worse. White bulls are more expensive, more valuable than black ones. However, on a black one, if you have a black bull, you want it to be all black. And so if you have a white spot on a black bull, that white spot is deficient. Okay, so that's Rav Chisda. Now, Tanan, we're going to challenge Rav Chisda. Shachor sheyaseh mi beti rishon hekdesh. Kalsa kadatin ki makdish be'ayin ra'a makdish. V'amri bet Shammai have hekdesh. In general, in many cases throughout Kodashim especially, there's a discussion about when a person says an ambiguous statement, does he mean to be generous or stingy? For example, a person has two items, maybe two animals in front of him, and he says, one of these is going to be hekdesh, and he doesn't specify which one, and one is more valuable, one is less valuable. So the question is, when most people, when they donate something, should we assume that they want to be generous and they want to give the more expensive one, so he has to give more expensive, or do people generally mean to be stingy, although they're giving a donation, but they want to give the least donation, the smallest donation that will fulfill their vow that they said. Okay, so right now in this sugya, we're assuming the side that says ki makdish ba'ayin ra'a makdish. Ayin ra'a means stingy. A person wants to give the least amount possible. On that assumption, let's analyze the Mishnah. The Mishnah was talking about a case where a person said the black bull that comes out of the house first will be hekdesh, and according to Bet Shammai, if a white one comes out first, that white one is hekdesh. Okay, we're assuming just a simple reading of the Mishnah, that the white one is hekdesh. And so, now Bet Shammai says the white one is hekdesh. Why would that be? If he thought that a white one is the white one is more expensive, well then it shouldn't be that the white one should be hekdesh, because a person generally is stingy. And maybe he said the black one because he wants to be stingy. He says, listen, I only want to give a black one, and therefore when the white one comes out first, we should say that's not hekdesh. Obviously he didn't mean that. He said the black one because he wants to give the cheaper one. The fact that Bet Shammai says the white one is hekdesh, and we are also assuming that a person is stingy when he's stingy in his giving, that means that it's the white one that is less expensive than the black one. That's why when the white one comes out first, and we're not sure what did you mean but when you said the one that comes out first, but you also said black, and Bet Shammai says it's whatever came out first. And even though this one is cheaper, still that's hekdesh. right? So according to this statement, we see that white bulls are less expensive than black ones, and this challenges Rav Chisda, who said that white ones are more expensive than black ones. Okay, that's our question. So now we say, well, elamai ba'ayin yafa makdish. Then, okay, let's change our assumption. Maybe we'll go with the other opinion that says that when a person says something ambiguous, he means to be generous. That's why, white bulls are in fact more expensive. And when the white bull comes out, even though the person says a black bull, but he also said first, what he said was ambiguous, we can assume he meant to be generous, and therefore the white bull comes out. We assume he's generous, and the white bull is hekdesh. That's the reason for Bet Shammai. All right, yes, that will work for the case 1. But what about case 2? Dinar shel zahav she'aleh biyadi rishon ve'ala kesef Bet Shammai omrim hekdesh. In the second case, clearly the person said the golden coin that I pick first, and then a silver one. Obviously, silver is less expensive than gold, and yet Bet Shammai says it is hekdesh. So we see from the second case that that Bet Shammai thinks, that this Mishnah assumes that people are generally stingy, and they want to give the least, and that's why, even though the person says golden coin that comes out first, because he assumed the golden coin would come out first, but he really meant whatever comes out first, even though he was in error about which one came out first. We're following again the simple reading of the Mishnah without the reinterpretations we saw earlier. So even though he made an error about which one, whether it was gold or silver, it is hekdesh, because we assume that people are stingy. So you can't say ayin yafa. It's got to be ayin ra'ah. So we're back to a question about in the first case. But that's also a problem. How can you read ayin ra'ah throughout this Mishnah? How about the third case? Havit shel yain sheta'aleh biyadi rishon. Va'ala shel shemen, Bet Shammai omrim hekdesh. Va'shemen adif miyayin. In the third case, person says a barrel of wine that I will take first, and turns out that the first one he took was oil. Bet Shammai says it is hekdesh, but oil is more expensive than wine. So that means that it's not ayin ra'ah, ayin yafa. And even though he took something that's more expensive, we assume that a person is generous and would want to. So the third case assumes ayin yafa. The second case assumes ayin ra'ah. How do we reconcile and read all of them in the same way? So we answer imishum halakasha. Well, if that's your problem, we can answer that. Begalila shanu dechamra adif mimishcha. This Mishnah was taught in the Galilee. In the Galilee, oil. In the Galilee, wine is more expensive than oil. In the Galilee, they have a lot of olives, and so it's abundant. And oil is cheaper. Wine is more expensive. And so, in fact, we can interpret the second and third case to be the same. That the thing that comes out is he meant to say the more expensive thing, gold and wine, and in the end, a less expensive thing came out, and so we can interpret both of these cases as being ayin ra'ah. Okay, good. So now that we at least read all the cases as being that we assume a person is stingy, we go back to our original question to Bet Shammai, to Rav Chisda, that it looks like when this animal comes out, that the black, then he said, I want a black one to come out. Sounds like the black one is superior, right? Look in all the other cases, the gold one that comes out, right? The wine that comes out first. He's assuming when he says black that the black is more expensive, right? So this does fit a continuous reading of the Mishnah. A black bull, gold, wine, those are the expensive items he has in mind. And then the inferior one comes out. So the white one is inferior. So back to our challenge to Rav Chisda. So the answer is Resha Kasha. So Resha Kasha Rav Chisda. So we have the challenge to Rav Chisda. Amar lach Rav Chisda ki amri betura de karmonae. Rav Chisda says, no, when I said that the white one is better, that was talking about this Carmanian bull, a certain type of bull where the white ones are better. But that's what I was talking about. But the Mishnah is talking about a regular kind of bull. In fact, the black one is superior. Okay, good. Ve'amar Rav Chisda ukama lemashche sumeka lebisre chivala leridiya. Rav Chisda happened to say something else about different colors of bulls. Rav Chisda had a lot to say on this subject. And he said actually each color is good for a different thing. A black bull is good for its hide. A red one is good for its meat. A white one is good for working, for plowing. So they're good in different ways. Now, question on that. He also said a black bull among white is deficient. That sounds like it's deficient in all regards, that a black is always worse than white, right? And here he's saying no, and only certain types. And we answer, same answer as we said over here. No, that statement when he said that black is worse than white, that's only talking about the Carmanian bull, not all bulls. And here, this statement is talking about bulls in general. So for bulls in general, white is good for one thing, black is good for another thing. And our Mishnah, that is assuming that black is better than white, so that's talking about here, that it's good for its hide, for example. And so that's the more expensive one. I guess that was used for that more than the others. And so that's why Rav Chisda said his statement. The statement above was only talking about Carmanian bulls, but in general, in the logic of the Mishnah, it's clear that for regular bulls, black ones are better than white. All right, we're talking about black and white, but even that is not such a black and white issue. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.